Welcome to One Cool Story, Tales from the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication. I'm your host, Julia Bobach, and in this episode, Multimedia Journalism Master student Kaiya Laguardia-Yonamine sat down with Andrew DeVigal, director of the Agora Journalism Center and professor of practice at the Portland SOJC campus. He tells us about his experience working for local newsrooms and national ones, how he kept coming back to journalism despite wanting to be a programmer early in life, and, of course, his one cool story. Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us today.
What's up, Kaiya? It's good to be here.
Yeah, good to see you.
Always.
Really excited to have you on this podcast today. I'm excited to be in our Portland campus audio booth as well, brand new studio.
It just still smells like a new car, right?
Yeah. Awesome. So really excited to get into this. I'd like to start by maybe having you tell us a little about yourself, just so that the listeners who might not know you get to know you a little bit more. So
Sure.
Who's Andrew?
Who's Andrew? So full name is Andrew DeVigal. I currently serve as the director of the Agora Journalism Center, which is the Forum for Local News and Civic Health here in Oregon. So that is a center within the School of Journalism and Communications at the University of Oregon. I also teach journalism, have the privilege to both teach here in the master's program in Portland as well as undergraduate courses as well in Eugene. So I get my miles in. All of this is following a career of being a journalist for about 30 years, if not more, and having taught a number of institutions and worked at a number of news organizations, last of which was at the New York Times.
Thank you so much. I mean, so many hats, so many titles. You do it all, So I'm really glad to have you here and get to talk more about all your experiences. I wanted to start our conversation with the Agora Journalism Center, actually, since you are in that role, because it also kind of feels like it's your baby in a way. Like it's your project and you've developed it so much over the years. So what exactly is Agora and what does the center do?
Thank you for that. It actually kind of saddens me when you say that it's my baby, only because I think it's really in service to journalism. A lot of times people come up to me and are like, Agora, is there a funder named Agora? One of the reasons why we named it the Agora Journalism Center is we really was thoughtful in terms of what we wanted the center to do. The center's role is really to invite people from a community to gather, to present new information, deliberate, and try to solve the community's challenges together as a community. And there was a place like that in ancient Greece, right? It was called the Agora, or as my wife would say, the Agora. That is the intention of the center, is to bring communities together and help solve problems together as a community.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah. The Agora.
The Agora. That's right. That's right.
I remember seeing like these different reports coming out of Agora, and you were mentioning like civic engagement work, but how does that kind of translate into the research and things that you all do at the center too?
No, I appreciate that. So our main pillars at Agora is really to build a sustained and collaborative laboratory to improve the local information ecosystem here in the state. We also create and share research, case studies, and toolkits to really help support, the dissemination of information across the industry. It really is sort of a landscape scan of the kinds of local news and information here in the state. The number of local news outlets, the number of civic media and organizations to really help support that. And then finally, we also want to develop innovative curriculum to really teach young people how to practice this type of community-centered journalism. We actually go into a specific community. So the very first one was La Pine, Oregon, and we've done Hermiston, Salem, Rogue Valley, Oak Ridge, Florence. What's exciting about this term is we're actually doing 2 cities in Lincoln County. And what we do there is we actually co-design an information needs assessment, and then we actually host listening sessions so that we invite community members to really talk about how they get information, what makes it trustworthy. I think a big part of it is what is broadcast looking like? What does radio and podcast look like? What are influencers and content creators, right? So we want to be able to be tapped into understanding how people access this, because that is part of the health of communities and how we connect local news to the civic health of the areas that we're covering.
When it comes to Agora and all the lessons and things that you've been hearing from going out to the cities, doing these information sessions, what have you been hearing about the ways that people are interacting in the first place and kind of needing that local journalism right now?
One of the things that we first come across is the fact that social media is still an avenue that people get information. And in fact, it's still Facebook groups. And I understand a lot, especially the young listeners of this podcast, is like, Facebook?
What is that?
Yeah, exactly. What is that? It's this platform. No, I'm kidding. But there's still a bulk of people who are getting information through social media. I think that's an element that's consistent regardless of what age you're in. We also recognize that most community members will go there for information, kind of already knowing that maybe the information there isn't as trustworthy or isn't of high quality. But people still go there because, A, they find information there, but they also, more importantly, find community. And that's what we got to remember. Most people trust individuals than they do of institutions. And think about that, right? Even when there was only 3 radio or television stations, they don't necessarily trust, say, ABC. What they do is they trust Walter Cronkite. There's a sense of people following certain individuals, certain content creators, influencers, or community members that they have a built-in relationship, but there is that level of trust. When we want to fill those people's information needs, we got to start thinking about how people connect in these platforms in that very sort of personal way.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really awesome to hear all the great things that Agora and that you are working on within Agora. I'd also like to take a step back, though, because Agora is one hat of Andrew DeVigal, but also there's so many other things that have led you to the point of where you are now. So I want to start at the very beginning.
All right.
So first things first, what was your first job in journalism?
Oh, that's digging deep. That's digging deep. In fact, my very first journalism job was working at the Contra Costa Times in Walnut Creek, California. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it was my very first journalism job because I really actually applied for a role mainly because I knew how to type. I was thinking I was going to be a programmer, right? So I learned how to type in high school. That's actually learning how to type with a typewriter. And I was like, you know what? It sounds like I could probably make use of this and probably get a better paying job. So the graphics director at the time said, hey, do you want to work for us as a clerical assistant? We need help with the technology, backup systems, transfer AP graphics that comes through the wires, make it into one of our style of graphics, and then we can publish it. Got the job, and that sort of launched my career at the Contra Costa Times, which is, again, a suburban newspaper in Northern California. Again, this opportunity and take advantage of the door opening, leveraging the skill that I was unique in. Also, because I was working in the graphics department, the graphics director, I still remember his name, Sheldon Carpenter, ended up saying, can I teach you how to draw with a mouse? So to me, that's where the evolution of me becoming a graphic staff artist really came to play, and was really fortunate to be given that opportunity from Sheldon.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you, Sheldon.
Yeah.
It's awesome that you got to be in the newsroom and be in that experience without straight up being a journalist as well. You get to learn all the things around journalism and how to apply them into eventually the storytelling that you ended up doing.
Once I got my degree in information systems, I was like, oh, I should probably make use of my knowledge as a programmer to find another job. So I ended up getting a job as a real estate programmer. But ironically, I did not enjoy working as a programmer. So, God forbid, you got your degree and you spent all these years and found out you didn't really enjoy it. It was very isolating. And I missed the opportunity to work with others in a collaborative sense to produce something. That really stuck with me. It was just really to kind of listen to yourself, to really listen to what you want to do and what you're passionate about. And I was lucky enough to recognize that my calling was really to actually perhaps tell stories, to work collaboratively across disciplines to produce something good. So I actually ended up pleading and going back on hands and knees to my old boss. And I said, you know what? Can I have my job back? Is there an opportunity to go back into Contra Costa Times? And unfortunately, the job was filled. But the graphics director said, but I do know of another opportunity at the Chicago Tribune as a one-year fellow. and I know the graphics director there. So it was a great opportunity to say, hey, maybe I can apply. She would write a letter of recommendation. And sure enough, started working there as a fellow. And I think it was in that time when I started producing graphics as a journalist at the Chicago Tribune. It was really a meaningful way to tell stories through the visual medium. At the time, it was unique because the graphics was very hand-in-hand with the design department as well, so we were all in one room. And there was such a commitment at the Tribune to actually tell visual stories, in so much that even in the front page, almost every day there was a visual element, whether it was an informational graphics or it was an explanatory graphic. I remember, again, another person I appreciate, Stacy Sweat, who was my graphics editor at the time. She was really instrumental in putting me on page one almost every day. I think she did this for like 4 months straight, at a point where I finally said to her, I said, is there any chance I can get out of graphics, at least page one graphics? Because it was pretty draining. It was an amazing experience, but also draining eventually. And the other thing that I learned when I was at the Tribune was the fact that, I wanted to really take advantage in observing what the gaps were within the department. So for an example, I noticed that at the time, most people were either using Quark Express as a layout program. They would also use Adobe Illustrator or even Aldous Freehand. Again, putting myself in time. But I also noticed that nobody was really focusing on how to do artwork using Adobe Photoshop. So I observed that there was a gap in that need within the newsroom, that I ended up really learning how to use Photoshop as a tool, and I would apply it to everyday projects that I would be working on. And they ended up liking it, right? They really appreciated the kind of visual style that you could introduce into these kind of graphics. A good lesson to go forward is to really just get a sense of the gaps and the needs of your environment and try to fill those opportunities with your own skill sets.
Yeah, that's awesome. You got to take a step back almost and be able to see how you can apply the skills that you already had in these kind of spaces that might make something new, and all the opportunities that come afterwards.
Exactly. I think the industry or the area of visual journalism is fairly small. So again, make use of your networks, make use of the people that you meet, and don't burn any bridges unless you have to.
Yeah. What came next for you in your career?
After my fellowship ended, worked as a full-time graphic journalist for about a year or two, and then the opportunity to launch ChicagoTribune.com came about. So again, this kind of puts the timeline in place that here I am helping to develop the very first website for a major newspaper. But I saw this as an opportunity to blend what I studied, right, which was information systems and programming and development. And remember, like back in those days, I didn't even know how to spell HTML, but I applied for this position, and it was just a great experience. I got the job as the sort of the visual producer of ChicagoTribune.com, helped design the very first website. And back in those days, there was no database behind all of the stories, so we actually literally hand-coded every story that we published.
What?
Hand-coded. After we launched, a colleague of mine in the print side looked at me and were like, oh my God, Andrew, you look like you aged 5 years. And it took 8 months to launch the website, but apparently I aged 5 years since launching the website. So after we launched, I was there for about another year or so. And then a good friend of mine named Ron Reason, who was a faculty member at Poynter, just called me up. It's like, you know what? We have a fellowship. Ding, 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 right? Remember, like opening doors. So to be able to be at the Poynter Institute for a year was a great opportunity to learn from some of the best people in the industry. Just a great opportunity to just be there and hang out with them for a year. Poynter Institute was a place where people came to you, right, to learn from. So one of the things I valued about my time at Poynter was the network grew exponentially for different kinds of people that you would connect with across the country, right? So what a blessing to be able to enrich your network, meet with amazing professionals, and still learn at the same time.
It's almost like a theme here that I'm seeing, but it seems like you've been there for so many, almost like origin stories, a lot of these places, and it kind of feels like a snowball effect a little bit, like
snowball effect.
You started off with your graphics that brought you to the website design from the Chicago Tribune team, and then it went from there all the way to Poynter and learning from all these people there, so it's really awesome to see how applicable these skills were.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you mentioning like a snowball effect, like an avalanche of these kinds of lessons. So we'll bookmark that. So after being at Poynter for several years, another opportunity to go back to the Bay Area came up. And it was actually going to my very first academic institution and going back to my alma mater at San Francisco State. It was an opportunity to go into the journalism department and become a professor and to really teach journalism. I spent so many hours, days, weeks developing presentations to help sort of with my teaching and learning. And I wanted to like have a tool that would allow me to call up different kinds of interactive stories or different kinds of multimedia stories that I see out there. And I said to myself, what would happen if it was more of a database that can call up during a presentation? Just type in some keywords and it shows up. So I worked with a developer, knew how to work enough to build something with him. And we ended up calling it interactive narratives. And it suddenly became more of a platform for other multimedia journalists to use for inspiration. Along the way, I ended up launching a podcast for interactive narratives where I ended up interviewing amazing, what we used to call solo journalists, people like Naka Nathaniel, Travis Fox. So Naka was with the New York Times. Travis Fox was with the Washington Post. Brian Storm, before Media Storm, he was with MSNBC. All these great opportunities to connect with working professionals, top of their game in this podcast environment to learn from. And I would actually attest to the fact that because of this website, I think that's one of the reasons why I got a call from the New York Times about 4 years into teaching at San Francisco State. Fiona Spruill, who called me from the Times, basically said, you know what, we've been trying to fill this multimedia editor job for a while, and every time we interview people, your name keeps coming up. And I think it's because of this website, right? I interviewed people and I met with people and I highlighted projects. Fiona ended up saying, why don't we just fly you out here and interview you to figure out what we can do? So after 2 days of interviewing with the New York Times, Fiona just walked up and said, you know what? I think we just stop BSing. Like, we want to offer you the job. So what a great opportunity, right? Again, doors opening and listening to yourself. Of course, I was still teaching at San Francisco State at the time, so I had to give, I think it was a 3-month yes. Yes, I would love to work here, but it will take me 3 months to get here. So
let me finish the term first.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, I left in the middle of the term because I just had to take advantage of it.
That's amazing that you got the call because everybody was mentioning your name as well. Like, that fact alone shows how much connections matter, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, we got to get into this. You're at the New York Times. You're the editor of the Multimedia Desk.
Yes.
What was that experience like? What were you up to? What were your projects?
It was probably the best experience in my career was working at the Times. Of course, I would attest it to the fact that I was just working with people I felt like were at the top of their game. If we take it literally, multimedia means all media. So, of course, my desk was responsible in some ways connecting with video, with graphics, with design, with audio, with print. I saw my desk as the hub to be able to make that connection. That's what I really thrived in, is this environment of collaboration. It was really shaping to what I believe in was the future of journalism, was to blend all of these components together to make one single experience. It was 8 years of building a desk of originally 3 people to eventually to, I think, about a dozen overall, and was really proud of the work that we did, from 1 in 8 million, which was a weekly piece that came out and helped tell the stories of New Yorkers, to A Year at War, which was an amazing package that was visually led by Damon Winter. Amazing experience to be able to push the boundaries of interactive storytelling and innovate in ways to inspire others and to push the industry forward.
Yeah. You went from this giant national organization like New York Times, and then we have this shift into eventually Agora Journalism Center in Oregon. So I'm wondering, what was that shift like for you to go from this larger news group into a more locally focused, community-centered kind of space? And why make that shift?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot going on. I started a family. Our daughter was 2 at the time when we started thinking about leaving New York. I was intrigued by the notion of where the industry was going. Facebook, Twitter, they were all hot at the time. I wanted to better understand how people were not just consuming content, but almost expecting to be part of the story. So despite recognizing that I spent my career thinking about how we change the content or the story on the screen, I was growing more intrigued by how do we interact with each other as communities because of the stories we see on the screen. I think proximity matters. I think local news and information is influenced by the communities that you're surrounded in. I was hungry for this idea of local, be much more localized.
Absolutely. Yeah, people want to see themselves in the stories that they're learning and that they're accessing.
That's
so
exactly right.
So important for local people, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. People do want to see themselves, right?
Is there anything that you ever miss from being a part of the New York Times or being in that kind of a workspace?
I think I miss the resources of an organization like the Times, where if I had an idea in the morning, I had a team that was able to execute different kinds of stories interactively. And we were able to produce that within a day, publish it, and get feedback right away. Like, there's no other place like that to be able to experiment at a national level like that and really get a chance to understand what worked and what didn't for improvement for the next day. It's a grind, but if you keep an open mind to learn constantly, it just makes your work better. And having the resources to be able to pull that off on a regular, if not daily basis, it's unmatched for that kind of experience. So, going into any academic institution, it's always trying to raise funding, trying to raise other opportunities to get your work done is part of the work now, right? And that's, I guess, a nice way of saying, yeah, we got to raise our own money.
Yeah. And now we're here.
And now
we're in Oregon, This is actually a great segue for us to get back into the work at the SOJC at our U of O Portland campus. I really want to hear about what your experience has been like teaching at the Portland campus and if there's any, valuable experiences, lessons, things that you've come across while teaching here at the U of O.
I think what I'm learning about myself in teaching is the fact that I take all the lessons I've done so far in my career and want to flip it to the classroom. I try to teach every class as if it is an experiential learning opportunity. So whether it's taking a class like my Engaged Journalism class, where we go to different communities across the state to better understand their information needs, or, as you've experienced, Kaiya, in our Community Voices class, where we invited community members in, not because we had a story idea in mind, but more about listening to them so that we can better understand what the story is about their communities. I really like to approach journalism with that open mind to learn and to listen to learn, rather than determining what the story is ahead of time and then asking community members to fill that out. So it actually improves, again, this idea of Agora, right? Because we're listening and we're deliberating and we're finding solutions together.
You're now our co-director for Multimedia Storytelling Master's program at U of O and our Portland campus. You're teaching all these classes. I mean, we're in a brand new building. We're in a brand new studio. So many opportunities for engagement here. So what are some hopes you have for the future of this campus, of your courses, even your role with the Multimedia Storytelling program?
Yeah, I think my hope for both this campus and SOJC here in Portland is really to continue to keep our ear on the ground in terms of what are the needs. Not just, again, information needs of communities, but what are the needs that communities have to actually help tell their own story. Yes, we train journalists, and we hope that the journalists are actually coming from a community that they feel well represented. My aim and my mission and my North Star is helping to make that happen, helping to not just define what journalism might look like in the near future or in the future, but how do we, again, really support the information health of a community so that it actually supports the civic health of that community? How can we all come together, and how can we really help support a multicultural society that we want to live in.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you said earlier, too, about being able to bring these skill sharing moments into all of our spaces so that people can, I don't know, share the reality that they have also. With that, I'm really curious because I heard that we have a podcasting micro-credential here on the Portland campus, and I feel like that relates a lot to this engagement storytelling work. So I was wondering if you could share a little about what is this micro-credential I'm hearing about and who's it for?
Sure. So we have 2 micro-credential programs here within the School of Journalism and Communications in the Masters in Multimedia Storytelling program, where you can take 4 of the classes that make up the master's program. But if you end up taking these specific 4, you can walk away with a micro-credential. So there's 2 of them, the first one being the video production micro-credential, and then the second one that I help sort of design and lead is looking at community podcasting. Going back to this notion that we mentioned earlier about helping community members to tell their own story, and that is the vision. Wouldn't that be wonderful for as many people who are in those roles to take a micro-credential and learn the skill sets to be able to expand and help tell stories of their communities?
I feel like it's really awesome that this micro-credential is like any student, but also like, in my opinion, like different community leaders and those kind of people who maybe if they don't see themselves as journalists, at least as storytellers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And labels are labels, but how to bring those stories around is going to be really exciting.
Right.
One of my last questions.
Sure.
You've worked in like newsrooms that are huge and local communities, and now you're doing research really on like the status of local journalism and civic health within Oregon. So I'm just wondering, after going through all these paths and all these journeys, how do you personally see the future of journalism going, or where do you hope journalism evolves from here?
I think one of the things that I mentioned before, and one of the reasons why I left the Times to think more locally and to really think about how we engage with each other, I think it goes back to that, right? Because this gatekeeping role, this telling community stories from an ivory tower, if you will, I think the future of journalism is collaborative. I think it's collaborative with other journalists, but also it's collaborative with everyday people and the stories that we're telling, again, not for, but rather with people. How do we build the future of journalism in a way do people feel involved? Otherwise, I feel like the way we're heading right now, I think it's confusing. We run the risk of information overload, but I think that's one way for us to really see the value of journalism and the true purpose of journalism, to connect that to the civic health of how we connect and engage with each other as a multicultural society.
Awesome. Thank you so much. In my head, how I see it is like the distance that a newsroom, quote unquote newsroom idea has with local community members, and being able to bridge that gap even more is going to be really impactful. So I'm excited to see what Agora continues to get out of that also in the research that y'all do here across Oregon. Well, Andrew, at the end of these episodes, we like to ask our guests to share one cool story, whether that's a unique experience you've had through your work, or even an interesting project you work on, or just something most people might not know about you. So take it away. What's your one cool story?
I think the one that came up for me was actually a project that we launched at the New York Times called Snowfall, the avalanche of Tunnel Creek. So when you mentioned snowball earlier, I was like, oh, interesting that you used the word snowball. It was a groundbreaking digital journalism piece, I would say, that was published at the Times back in December 2012. A reporter by the name of John Branch tells the story of this avalanche that happened in Washington State, where a group of very skilled skiers and snowboarders were caught in this sudden snowslide. It stands out from traditional reporting and traditional journalism because it combined storytelling with multimedia in this very authentic way, right? There was a new form that came out called scrollytelling, where as you were scrolling through a piece, multimedia elements came about and helped tell the story. So rather than just reading the text, it included long-form reporting along with interactive graphics, animations, videos, maps, and photos that would appear as you're scrolling through the piece. The story itself won a 2013 Pulitzer Prize for feature writing and also won a Peabody Award, which is unusual for journalism because it was created in such a unique way. So I tell that context of the story because the interesting one cool story is how that came to be. I still remember when that story opportunity came on my desk. The deputy sports editor by the name of Jason Stallman came to me and said, "Hey, Andrew, I think we have a great story that John's going to work on, and I think it has some really great opportunities to blend in multimedia. We have great access to the survivors of the avalanche. We can get some really great tape to be able to tell that story." So I immediately went up to my friend and colleague, Steve Duenas, who was leading the graphics department at the time, and said, "Hey, this might be a cool story that we can collaborate on." So we called a meeting with Joe Sexton, who was the sports editor at the time. So we sat down in a room, me, Steve, and Joe, and Jason, and we described what our vision was for this story. But Steve and I ended up going to Joe and said, "There's one catch. We need to edit the words with you as we're telling the story." At that moment, Joe somehow, I think, slammed the table or something very physical, stood up and left. He was like, "There's no way that you're going to edit my writer. That's my job." Steve and I looked at each other like, what the hell just happened? After Steve and I picked up our jaw from the floor, we're like, well, I guess that's it. I guess that's over. That was the end of that day. 3 days later, Jason Stallman came back to my desk and basically said, "Hey, man, I talked to Joe, and he's in." What? So I had to ask Jason. I'm like, "What happened? What did you end up saying to get Joe to come to our side?" And Jason basically reminded him. He said, "You know what? We've been working for years. We've collaborated." Again, that word, collaboration. We've collaborated on multiple projects with success in the past. And this is an opportunity to really push the boundaries. In fact, Joe Sexton tells this story in a long-form podcast several years ago. And his perspective in that podcast was saying he would come to realize that he just needs to get off his high horse. What he said was, we want to thrive in a culture of saying yes, because yes provides risk, but saying yes also can make great things happen. And that's why he said yes.
That is so amazing. And look what happened.
Yeah, that's true collaboration. And really great things can happen.
Well, thank you so much for coming onto our podcast, Andrew. This was such a fun time. I really appreciated it.
I appreciate you so much. So thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
What an incredible story, only aided by Andrew's innovative graphics and immersive storytelling skills. Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of One Cool Story, Tales from the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to hear more, find us wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. To stay up to date on what's happening at the SOJC, follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Blue Sky at UOSOJC. From Allen Hall, I'm Julia Bobach. See you next time.